Welcome to Exam Heist. Here you will find everything you need to crack your Microsoft certification exams. Our actual exam study material and 24/7 expert guidance will help you achieve your goals. Visit now examheist.com to get our free PDF and start your cloud journey. Subscribe and stay tuned. Thank you. This video contains the 40 most important questions of the AZ-104 exam. Note, you should always learn from a certified trainer only. You must practice these exam questions to crack your AZ-104 exam. You can find the complete PDF of this video along with our other certification exam dumps on our website examheist.com. To the questions. Question 1. You have an Azure AD tenant that contains 5000 user accounts. You create a new user account named admin user 1. You need to assign the user administrator administrative role to admin user 1. What should you do from the user account properties? The correct option is B. From the directory role blade, modify the directory role. Assign a role to a user. First, sign into the Azure portal with an account that's a global admin or privileged role admin for the directory. Select Azure Active Directory, select users, and then select a specific user from the list. For the selected user, select directory role, select add role, and then pick the appropriate admin roles from the directory roles list, such as Conditional Access Administrator. Press select to save. Question 2. You have an Azure subscription. Users access the resources in the subscription from either home or from customer sites. From home, users must establish a point-to-site VPN to access the Azure resources. The users on the customer sites access the Azure resources by using site-to-site VPNs. You have a line of business app named App1 that runs on several Azure virtual machines. The virtual machines run Windows Server 2016. You need to ensure that this connection to App1 are spread across all the virtual machines. What are two possible Azure services that you can use? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. The correct options are A and E, that is, an internal load balancer and an Azure application gateway. Network traffic from the VPN gateway is routed to the cloud application through an internal load balancer. The load balancer is located in the front-end subnet of the application. Question 3. You have an Azure subscription. You have 100 Azure virtual machines. You need to quickly identify underutilized virtual machines that can have their service tier changed to a less expensive offering. Which blade should you use? The correct option is B, Advisor. Advisor helps you optimize and reduce your overall Azure spend by identifying idle and underutilized resources. You can get cost recommendations from the Cost tab on the Advisor dashboard. Question 4. You have an Azure subscription linked to an Azure Active Directory tenant. The tenant includes a user account named user1. You need to ensure that user1 can assign a policy to the tenant root management group. What should you do? Assign the global administrator role to user1 and then instruct user1 to configure access management for Azure resources. No one is given default access to the root management group. Azure AD global administrators are the only users that can elevate themselves to gain access. Once they have access to the root management group, The global administrators can assign any Azure role to other users to manage it. Question 5. You have an Azure subscription that contains a user named user1. You need to ensure that user1 can deploy virtual machines and manage virtual networks. The solution must use the principle of least privilege. Which role-based access control role should you assign to user1? The correct option is C. Contributor. Contributor grants full access to manage all resources but does not allow you to assign roles in Azure RBAC. Question 6. You have an Azure subscription named Subscription 1 that contains an Azure virtual machine named VM1. VM1 is in a resource group named RG1. VM1 runs services that will be used to deploy resources to RG1. You need to ensure that a service running on VM1 can manage the resources in RG1 by using the identity of VM1. What should you do first? The correct option is A. From the Azure portal, modify the managed identity settings of VM1. Managed identities for Azure resources provides Azure services with an automatically managed identity in Azure AD. You can use this identity to authenticate to any service that supports Azure AD authentication without having credentials in your code. You can enable and disable system assigned managed identity for VM using the Azure portal. Question 7. You have a registered DNS domain named contoso.com. You create a public Azure DNS zone named contoso.com. You need to ensure that records created in the contoso.com zone are resolvable from the internet. What should you do? The correct option is D. Modify the NS records in the DNS domain registrar. Registrar owns the TLD and will have their NS registered against the domain by default. By changing the registrar NS records to point to your Azure DNS NS records, you take ownership into your Azure DNS. Question 8. You have 3 offices and an Azure subscription that contains an Azure AD tenant. You need to grant user management permissions to a local administrator in each office. What should you use? The correct option is B. Administrative units. Administrative units restrict permissions in a role to any portion of your organization that you define. You could, for example, use administrative units to delegate the help desk administrator role to regional support specialists so they can manage users only in the region that they support. Question 9. You have an Azure App Services web app named App1. You plan to deploy App1 by using web deploy. You need to ensure that the developers of App1 can use their Azure AD credentials to deploy content to App1. The solution must use the principle of least privilege. What should you do? The correct option is C. Assign the website contributor role to the developers. To secure app deployment from a local computer, Azure App Service supports 2 types of credentials for local Git deployment and FTP/S deployment. These credentials are not the same as your Azure subscription credentials. Question 10. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual machine named VM1. You plan to deploy an Azure Monitor Alert rule that will trigger an alert when CPU usage on VM1 exceeds 80%. You need to ensure that the alert rule sends an email message to 2 users named user1 and user2. What should you create for Azure Monitor? The correct option is A. An action group. Alert consists of action groups, alert conditions, user responses, Alert processing rules. Question 11. You have an Azure subscription that contains multiple virtual machines in the West US Azure region. You need to use traffic analysis in Azure Network Watcher to monitor virtual machine traffic. Which two resources should you create? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. The correct options are A and E, that is a log analytics workspace and data collection rule in Azure Monitor. To use traffic analytics in Azure Network Watcher to monitor virtual machine traffic, you need to create the following resources. A log analytics workspace. Traffic analytics requires a log analytics workspace to store and analyze network traffic data. E. A data collection rule in Azure Monitor. You need to create a data collection rule within Azure Monitor to specify what data should be collected and sent to the log analytics workspace, including the network traffic data for traffic analysis. So options A and E are correct answers. Question 12. You have an Azure subscription. The subscription contains 10 virtual machines that run Windows Server. Each virtual machine hosts a website in IIS and has the Azure Monitor agent installed. You need to collect the IIS logs from each virtual machine and store them in a log analytics workspace. What should you configure first? The correct option is A, a data collection endpoint. Question 13. You have an Azure subscription that has traffic analytics configured. You deploy a new virtual machine named VM1 that has the following settings: region East US, virtual network VNet1, NIC network security group NSG1. You need to monitor VM1 traffic by using traffic analytics. Which settings should you configure? The correct option is B, NSG flow logs for NSG1. Question 14. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual machine named VM1. You have an on-premises data center that contains a domain controller named DC1. ExpressRoute is used to connect the on-premises data center to Azure. You need to use Connection Monitor to identify network latency between VM1 and DC1. What should you install on DC1? The correct option is D, an Azure Monitor agent extension. Connection Monitor supports the Azure Monitor agent extension, which eliminates any dependency on the legacy log analytics agent. Question 15. You have an Azure subscription that contains an Azure SQL database named DB1. You plan to use Azure Monitor to monitor the performance of DB1. You must be able to run queries to analyze log data. Which destination should you configure in the diagnostic settings of DB1? The correct option is A, send to a log analytics workspace. Data sent to a log analytics workspace can be consumed by SQL Analytics, which provides intelligent monitoring of your databases, including performance reports, alerts, and mitigation recommendations. Moreover, data in a log analytics workspace can be analyzed alongside other monitoring data collected and also allows you to leverage other Azure Monitor features such as alerts and visualizations. Question 16. You have an Azure subscription. The subscription contains virtual machines that connect to a virtual network named VNet1. You plan to configure Azure Monitor for VM Insights. You need to ensure that all the virtual machines only communicate with Azure Monitor through VNet1. What should you create first? The correct option is C, an Azure Monitor private link scope. Question 17. You have an Azure subscription. You need to receive an email alert when a resource lock is removed from any resource in the subscription. What should you use to create an activity log alert in Azure Monitor? The correct option is a resource, a condition, and an action group. You create an alert rule by combining the resources to be monitored, the signal or telemetry from the resource, conditions. Then you define these elements for the resulting alert actions by using alert processing rules, action groups. Question 18. You deploy Azure virtual machines to 3 Azure regions. Each region contains a virtual network. Each virtual network contains multiple subnets paired in a full mesh topology. Each subnet contains a network security group that has defined rules. A user reports that he cannot use port 33,000 to connect from a virtual machine in one region to a virtual machine in another region. Which two options can you use to diagnose the issue? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. The correct options are B and D, that is IP flow verify and connection management. Azure Monitor Network Insights provides dashboard and access to the Diagnostics toolkit only, which cannot perform troubleshooting as IP flow verify and connection troubleshoot. Thus, I think the answer is B and D. Question 19. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual network named VNet1. VNet1 uses two express route circuits that connect to two separate on-premises data centers. You need to create a dashboard to display detailed metrics and a visual representation of the network topology. What should you use? The correct option is A. Azure Monitor Network Insights. Question 20. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual machine named VM1 and an Azure function named app1. You need to create an alert that will run app1 if VM1 stops. What should you create for the alert rule? The correct option is C, an action group. An action group is a collection of actions that are triggered by an Azure alert. In this scenario, you need to create an alert rule that will run app1 if VM1 stops, and for this purpose, you need to create an action group. An action group defines the set of actions to be taken when an alert is triggered, such as running an Azure function, sending an email, or creating an Azure ticket. By creating an action group and associating it with the alert rule, you can automate the process of running app1 if VM1 stops, without the need for manual intervention. This helps ensure that critical systems such as app1 are automatically activated when necessary, improving the overall reliability and availability of your Azure services. Question 21. You have an Azure subscription that contains a storage account named Storage1 in the North Europe Azure region. You need to ensure that when blob data is added to Storage1, a secondary copy is created in the East US region. The solution must minimize administrative effort. What should you configure? The correct option is B, object replication. Object replication is a feature that allows you to replicate data such as blobs across different storage accounts or containers within the same storage account. This can be configured to automatically copy data from one storage location to another, either within the same region or across different regions. Object replication can be used to create disaster recovery solutions or to distribute data globally for better performance and availability. It is similar to GRS, but it is far more flexible as you can choose the storage account and container to replicate the data. The GRS of a North Europe region is a secondary copy of the data stored in a different region. The exact location of the secondary region will depend on the specific Azure region you have selected. For the North Europe region, the secondary copy is stored in the West Europe region. This means that if there is an outage or disaster in the North Europe region, your data will still be available in the West Europe region. This provides a high level of data durability and protection. Question 22. You have an Azure subscription that contains 10 network security groups, 10 virtual machines, and a log analytics workspace named Workspace 1. Each NSG is connected to a virtual machine. You need to configure an Azure Monitor Network Insights alert that will be triggered when suspicious network traffic is detected. What should you do first? The correct option is D. Configure NSG flow logs. To configure an Azure Monitor Network Insights alert that will be triggered when suspicious network traffic is detected, you should first configure NSG flow logs. NSG flow logs provide information about traffic that is allowed or denied by an NSG. By configuring NSG flow logs, you will be able to monitor the traffic passing through your NSGs and detect any suspicious activity. Question 23. You plan to deploy several Azure virtual machines that will run Windows Server 2019 in a virtual machine scale set by using an Azure Resource Manager template. You need to ensure that Nginx is available on all the virtual machines after they are deployed. What should you use? The correct option is A. A desired state configuration extension. Answer is DSC. There is another version of this question where custom script extension is the right answer and there is no DSC option to choose. Question 24. You have an Azure App Service web app named App1. You need to collect performance traces for App1. What should you use? The correct option is A. Azure Application Insights Profiler. With Application Insights Profiler, you can capture and view performance traces for your application in all these dynamic situations automatically at scale without negatively affecting your end users. Question 25. You have a subnet named Subnet1 that contains Azure virtual machines. A network security group named NSG1 is associated to Subnet1. NSG1 only contains the default rules. You need to create a rule in NSG1 to prevent the hosts on Subnet1 from connecting to the Azure portal. The hosts must be able to connect to other internet hosts. To what should you set destination in this rule? The correct option is C. Service tag. You can use service tags to achieve network isolation and protect your Azure resources from the general internet while accessing Azure services that have public endpoints. Create inbound/outbound network security group rules to deny traffic to/from internet and allow traffic to/from Azure cloud or other available service tags of specific Azure services. Question 26. You have an Azure AD tenant that is linked to 10 Azure subscriptions. You need to centrally monitor user activity across all these subscriptions. What should you use? The correct option is D. A log analytics workspace. Keywords are centrally monitor and all subs. Question 27. You have an Azure subscription named Subscription 1 that contains two Azure virtual networks named VNet1 and VNet2. VNet1 contains a VPN gateway named VPN Gateway 1 that uses static routing. There is a site-to-site VPN connection between your on-premises network and VNet1. On a computer named Client1 that run Windows 10, you configure a point-to-site VPN connection to VNet1. You configure virtual network peering between VNet1 and VNet 2. You verify that you can connect to VNet 2 from the on-premises network. Client 1 is unable to connect to VNet 2. You need to ensure that you can connect client 1 to VNet 2. What should you do? The correct option is C. Download and reinstall the VPN client configuration package on client 1. After changes in topology, it is needed to reinstall the VPN client. Question 28. You have a recovery services vault named RSV1. RSV1 has a backup policy that retains instant snapshots for 5 days and daily backup for 14 days. RSV1 performs daily backups of VM1. VM1 hosts a static website that was updated 8 days ago. You need to recover VM1 to a point 8 days ago. The solution must minimize downtime. What should you do first? The correct option is D. Restore VM1 by using the Create New Restore Configuration option. Question 29. You have an Azure web app named App1. You need to monitor the availability of App1 by using a multi-step web test. What should you use in Azure Monitor? The correct option is B. Azure Application Insights. Upload the web test. First, in the Application Insights portal on the Availability pane, select Add Classic Test, then select Multi-Step as the SKU. Then, upload your multi-step web test. Set the test locations, frequency and alert parameters. Then finally, select Create. Question 30. You have an Azure web app named Web App 1. Users report that they often experience HTTP 500 errors when they connect to Web App 1. You need to provide the developers of Web App 1 with real-time access to the connection errors. The solution must provide all the connection error details. What should you do first? The correct option is A. From Web App 1, enable web server logging. Raw HTTP request data is provided by web server logging and the question mentions 500 error codes. You need to catch connection error. When the connection fails, it happens on web server, not within application. You can do it opening the web application, then application service logs, then web server logging. You can also see the errors live going to log stream pane. Web server logging, Windows App Service File System or Azure Storage Blobs, raw HTTP request data in the W3C extended log file format. Each log message includes data such as the HTTP method, resource URI, client IP, client port, user agent, response code, and so on. Question 31. You have an Azure virtual machine named VM1. Azure collects events from VM1. You are creating an alert rule in Azure Monitor to notify an administrator when an error is logged in the system event log of VM1. Which target resource should you monitor in the alert rule? The correct option is D. Azure Log Analytics Workspace. For the first step to create the new alert rule, under the Create Alert section, you are going to select your Log Analytics Workspace as the resource since this is a log-based alert signal. Question 32. You need to monitor the latency between your on-premises network and the virtual machines. What should you use? The correct option is C. Network Performance Monitor. Network Performance Monitor is a cloud-based hybrid network monitoring solution that helps you monitor network performance between various points in your network infrastructure. It also helps you monitor network connectivity to service and application endpoints and monitor the performance of Azure Express Route. You can now monitor network connectivity across cloud deployments and on-premises locations, multiple data centers and branch offices and and mission critical multi-tier applications or microservices. With Performance Monitor, you can detect network issues before users complain. Question 33. Your company has a main office in London that contains 100 client computers. 3 years ago, you migrated to Azure AD. The company's security policy states that all personal devices and corporate-owned devices must be registered or joined to Azure AD. A remote user named User1 is unable to join a personal device to Azure AD from a home network. You verify that User1 was able to join devices to Azure AD in the past. You need to ensure that User1 can join the device to Azure AD. What should you do? The correct option is D. From the device settings blade, modify the user may join devices to Azure AD setting. The maximum number of devices setting enables you to select the maximum number of devices that a user can have in Azure AD. If a user reaches this quota, they will not be able to add additional devices until one or more of the existing devices are removed. Question 34. You have an Azure subscription. You plan to migrate 50 virtual machines from VMware vSphere to the subscription. You create a recovery services vault. What should you do next? The correct option is D. Configure a virtual network. Question 35. You have 5 Azure virtual machines that run Windows Server 2016. The virtual machines are configured as web servers. You have an Azure load balancer named LB1 that provides load balancing services for the virtual machines. You need to ensure that visitors are serviced by the same web server for each request. What should you configure? The correct option is A. Session persistence to client IP. Question 36. You have an Azure subscription that contains a resource group named RG1 and a virtual network named VNet1. You plan to create an Azure container instance named Container1. You need to be able to configure DNS name label scope reuse for Container1. What should you configure for Container1? The correct option is B. The public networking type. For Azure portal users, you can set the DNS name reuse policy on the networking tab during the container instance creation process using the DNS name label scope reuse field, available after choosing public network type. Question 37. You have 2 Azure virtual machines named VM1 and VM2 that run Windows Server. The virtual machines are in a subnet named Subnet1. Subnet1 is a virtual network named VNet1. You need to prevent VM1 for accessing VM2 on port 3389. What should you do? The correct option is A. Create a network security group that has an outbound security rule to deny destination port 3389 and apply the NSG to the network interface of VM1. It will prevent connections from VM1 on port 3389 to any destination, including the other VM. Question does not say that VM1 should be able to access other VMs on this port, so it is fine to block all outgoing connections. Question 38. You have an Azure subscription that contains a storage account. The account stores website data. You need to ensure that inbound user traffic uses the Microsoft point of presence closest to the user's location. What should you configure? The correct option is C. Routing preference. Question 39. You have an Azure subscription that contains 20 virtual machines, a network security group named NSG1, and 2 virtual networks named VNet1 and VNet2 that are peered. You plan to deploy an Azure Bastion Basic SKU host named Bastion1 to VNet1. You need to configure NSG1 to allow inbound access to the virtual machines via Bastion 1. Which port should you configure for the inbound security rule? The correct option is B, 443. Using Bastion, your RDP/SSH session is over, TLS on port 443. If you say port 22, then what about Windows VM, as it is not mentioned that the VM is Windows or Linux? You will have to allow port 443 in NSG. Question 40. You plan to deploy route-based site-to-site VPN connections between several on-premises locations and an Azure virtual network. Which tunneling protocol should you use? The correct option is C, IKE v2. A site-to-site VPN gateway connection is used to connect your on-premises network to an Azure virtual network over an IPsec/IKE VPN tunnel. IKE v2 supports 10 S2S connections, while IKE v1 only supports 1. These were all the questions for this video. You can find the complete PDF of this video on our website examheist.com. If you need our custom cheat sheet to help you with your exam preparation, then please make sure to visit the link down in the description. Please make sure to subscribe our channel and press the bell icon. Thank you for watching and stay tuned.